There was a real chance that Binchagag was about to take up the rest of Mac's free time, so a few minutes to make himself presentable was probably warranted, except his shift began at 18:30. Nobody cared how you looked on the overnight shift. Velon was quite literally the city that didn't sleep. Most of the businesses operated in some form, even if that form was skeletal, all 20 hours of the day, all 7 days of the week, all 529 days of the year. Mac assumed this was true for the entirety of Inimata, and possibly true in other countries as well. It was definitely the case when he was in the military. But the military was run by crazy people who were probably looking for an hour 21 and 22 to take advantage of. At some point, everyone just agreed that lowered standards in personal grooming was their reward for what they called working the over. In short, Mac didn't need to shave, and even though the shower would have been nice, it was also unnecessary, so he skipped it too. He did find a clean shirt and a mostly clean pair of pants. Then he threw on his jacket, grabbed what he needed for work, and headed out. Hopefully, somebody downstairs had coffee brewing. The staircase leading to the apartment was external and perilously steep, which was a common characteristic in this part of the city. The buildings in Kindon Town looked to have been assembled haphazardly by a child god with a poor understanding of the basics of structural integrity. They leaned and loomed, and most appeared top-heavy. A lot of them were, thanks to probably illegal apartments built out of plywood on top of roofs. Mac lived in one of them. From the street level, it felt like the buildings were staring down from directly overhead, as if ripped from the nightmares of a worried agrarian on an unpleasant business trip. In Mac's version of this nightmare, the buildings were gaming tiles, stacked on their narrows, and awaiting that child god to come along and tap the building at the end, sending them crashing down one by one. He took a minute on the landing outside of his front door in order to take in the city. Even at night, and the dancers had set at least a couple of hours earlier, and even in this back-channel part of town, Velon was entirely too busy to cope with, absent a pause to recalibrate. Mac had spent the early part of his life in a uniform, running dropships and guarding borders, but none of that elevated his pulse rate as much as just walking out his own front door on a busy evening in downtown Velon. A merchant bazaar was going on across the street, spilling people off the curb and into traffic, which could have been a problem if any of the ground traffic was moving, which it wasn't. Above the ground traffic, every couple of minutes, an aero car drove by, blasting hot, steamy air from its rear exhaust fans, and raising the ambient temperature of all the atmosphere on the block by a couple of degrees, or so it seemed. Every crevice of city not taken up by a person or a car was occupied by an advertisement for something or a streetlight. It was, thankfully, a cloudy night. It had been raining off and on for the past 2 days, or the sky itself would have been taken up by an advertisement as well, as Linuss was scheduled to appear overhead in another hour. Mac loved everything about the city when he was on the ground, up a level, and looking down with the same trepidation as a kid who's about to learn how to swim in a rapidly flowing river. He couldn't believe anyone allowed themselves to live like this. He closed his eyes, waited for a little dizziness from what was probably incipient vertigo to pass, and then headed down to the basement to see what Binchagag wanted. The ground floor was taken up by a restaurant called Lucky Twins, which specialized in mediocre but exotic variations of Kindonese food. When Mac felt especially adventurous, or if he was just too tired to walk any further, he'd get food from the place, if only to entertain himself with a game of guess what part of what animal this thing came from. This was sometimes pretty easy, because certain body parts came out of the other side of food preparation looking a lot like they did when going into it, and then it became a game of, I dare you to eat this. He stopped at a bar halfway between the front door and the back staircase, and caught the eye of Lena, the probably underage girl currently tending bar. "Coffee?" he asked in Taku. "You look like you died 6 hours ago," she said. "Coffee's old." "Is it hot and more or less black?" "More or less." She poured a cup, then pushed a bowl of salted chicken skin rinds in front of him, and provided a shot of grain wine as accompaniment. "Hangover cure," she said.